Facing the Facts. I'm Sam Chase, your host, and with us tonight is the chairman of the Chelmsford Board of Selectmen, Ken Lefebvre. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
You did.
That's good. It's difficult when you see it written to know how to pronounce it, but that's quite all right. And glad that you could be with us tonight, Ken.
My pleasure.
And what we always do to start the show off is we always ask our guests to give us just a brief biographical sketch of yourself and your involvement with the community. So if you could start with that would
Sure.
be great.
So I'm a blow-in. I grew up in Concord, Mass, and so did you.
Yes, I did. We're both blow-ins.
Yes. And my wife and I, she was from Andover, and I went to Bentley College when I graduated. About, 8 months after graduation, I bought a condo bank-owned up in Adams Farm. Mm-hmm. And so that was back in '93, and that was supposed to be our starter sort of house. And my wife said she wanted to be 50 minutes from her parents. I wanted to be 50 minutes from my parents, so we stayed in Chelmsford. And then we bought our second home right off North Road. That was in '96. Really wasn't involved in anything public servant-wise in town. Raised 4 boys, was really involved in the sports. My wife was involved in all the PTOs she was in the PTO at Westlands, PTO at Center, PTO at McCarthy, PTO at the high school. And so we were just really involved in the town that way. That's how people got to know me. I always said that I got elected based on my kids, their reputation.
That's how you get to know people if you have
Yep.
children in the school system, right?
Yep. And so when my youngest finished Pop Warner, I was sitting there with a few members in town, and I said, geez, what are we going to do next fall? Because I was announcing the football games from Sunday morning at 7:30, 8 o'clock, all the way until it got dark. And I said, geez, I'm going to have all this free time. This is great. And I got a call the following week saying, you'd be good for selectman. And never had thought about it, and so I decided to run. And that's the extent of my involvement.
Well, I'd say that's pretty good involvement, and I would not necessarily downplay your what you term as your lack of public service, because certainly working with your children in the school system and in the sports program, which is an integral part of Chelmsford's being, I think, is a significant civic contribution. So I give you a lot of credit for doing that, especially with 4 children. Okay?
Yep, thanks.
So, but it is interesting, as you just characterized your run for selectman, because not too many people, I think, in the public life in Chelmsford had actually heard of you. And as you said, you weren't really involved. You weren't a town meeting rep or had served on many boards or anything like that. So it was a little bit surprising, I think, to some that you jumped into the fray when you did. But I think it's a good thing you did.
Baptism by fire. Had no idea what I was getting into.
Yes, and I know that you did the normal thing. You talked to several people that had the experience or had served on other boards to try to get a flavor of what was going on. So with that as a backdrop, and now you've been there 2+ years, and you're the chairman now, which is a natural progression. You were vice chair last year, correct?
Correct.
And were you clerk the first year?
I was clerk.
All right, so you did what could be termed the traditional progression, which isn't really so traditional anymore. When I was on the board years ago, I mean, that was the route that everybody took, but now it's kind of a mishmash of when people serve, but you actually followed that route, which I think is a good route to follow, to get the experience of serving on the board. So give us an idea of reality today versus what you may have thought going into it, or even 4 or 5 months into the job when you first started.
Yeah, it was interesting because I had no preconceived sort of thoughts, or I never even really watched selectmen meetings until about 3 months before.
That was probably a good thing.
Yeah, so I didn't really know what it, and the best advice I probably got was, the first year, sit down, shut up, and be quiet, and don't prove everybody's doubt correct, And
you pretty much did that, as I recall.
Yeah, I did. There was some behind-the-scenes stuff, and I wasn't afraid to ask questions, in the meetings when I didn't know exactly what was going on. And if it was, something I really didn't know, then I just waited, and when it was over, I went and did my homework. Or if I saw a topic coming up in the agenda that I wasn't 100% on, then you spend time making sure you research it and know what's going on. You give up a lot of weekends. Sort of, learning that process. So after the first year, you sort of get things down pat, and after the second year, you start to get in stride. it's interesting. I did, like a lot of people, if you look at social media, sort of felt like, what's going on in this town, a lot of this is rigged. Why do they do things this way? It doesn't make sense. And then you get into the seat and you start learning and you're realizing, well, a lot has to do with the state laws, the Mass General laws, the way they're set up and the way you're required to report things. And a lot of the process is required by Mass General law. So you realize you're sort of stuck doing it that way because that's the way the law is written. And it's not that it's rigged or that something else is going on behind the scenes. It's the way the law is written. Municipal accounting is different than regular accounting. It's just the way it has to be done. Someone asked me last week, why is it when the town, for instance, sells a truck, that money has to go back into the general fund and can't be used to purchase another truck for that department, versus if they trade it in, then they get the credit towards a new truck. Wouldn't they just be better off trading everything in? You don't get as much money as sending it out to auction usually. So it's better to send it to auction money-wise, but that's the way it's required by law to do it. There's nothing you can do about that. So I can understand someone's frustration in that process, but if you want the most money for the piece of equipment you're trying to get rid of, you send it to state auction. So.
And you bring up a very good point, and I think that's a good distinction. And I have absolutely no problem, and never have any problem with somebody who has an opinion that really doesn't know, and his opinion isn't based in fact. I have no problem with all of that, because we all have opinions, okay? What I have a problem with is when you demonstrate to people time and time and time again what the fact is. As you say, well, the selectmen can or cannot do this because we're constrained by state law, and that's all there is to it. People still don't buy it. They still look at you and say, well, that's nonsense, and you guys are crooks, or whatever they say. Okay, and you see it on social media all the time, that I think is a very frustrating part of the job when you just can't seem to get through to some folks what the reality is that you guys are having to deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah. And then you also have the problem with social media is the amount of assumptions people make that they then becomes fact. And
right.
That gets perpetuated through the social media outlets, and then all of a sudden now you got a problem because you're just dealing in a lot of sort of guessing and conjecture and everything else, and then you got to sit there and say, okay, what's true, what's not, and by then nobody wants to listen.
That's true, and I can remember, maybe a year or so ago, seeing on Facebook somebody mentioned the fact of trying to remember the exact wording. I think it was something to the effect of Facebook, where 3 million discussions are had and nobody's mind is changed, and I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, it's just it's a venting forum, I think, for a lot of people, and that's okay too, I suppose. So you did I think you hit the ground running during your first year, and I think you did follow your own advice pretty much by remaining quiet, but you did begin to speak up, I think, about 6 months in to the process. And one of the things that you and several of the other board members did was appear before the Charter Review Committee, and you asked for us to recommend several changes. And as part of that discussion, I think really the thrust of that was a philosophical situation, what we term strong town manager versus strong board of selectmen type of government. So I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of your thought process on that, and whether you think the situation we have in Chelmsford now is appropriate for the town, if you feel that in the future changes might be made along those regards in terms of the responsibilities that are currently defined in the charter, town manager versus board of selectmen.
Yeah. We're definitely, as you said, a strong town manager charter. And it seems like, it's gotten stronger over the last few years, in certain small areas, the constable being one, now that's no longer an elected position. And I've always said, I'll work with whatever. I mean, does any of it matter to me? No. I mean, just tell me what the rules are and I'll figure out how to play on the rules. Do I still think that, I think what you're alluding to is whether there should be a 3 or 4 vote for hiring of and releasing the town manager.
That was there were other issues involved, but I think that was the primary issue
Right.
that was under discussion.
And I think that you know, the goal behind that was just to send it to the ballot. You know, as far as town meeting, let the town meeting reps vote. You know, my feeling on that is always, I like to let the town meeting reps vote. If you want to make everybody feel like they've got full control over the direction of the town on these topics, let them vote. So that was sort of the reason why I said, you know, took that position.
Okay.
Because I just wanted it to go to town meeting.
That makes perfect
decide and come
sense.
back. And
Yep.
that was the extent. I wasn't after changing it. If they came back and said it stays 4 to release the town manager, fine. If it's 3, fine. Whatever the rules are, the rules are. I mean, I understand the logic behind 3. And I also, with the recent past that we had in this town, I can understand why people would be hesitant. You know, if you don't want to have a sort of a coup happen at you know, one of the elections where you have 2 new board members who've never served take seats, and then have 2 other board member or 1 other board member, and then you got your 3 to, you know, go after the town manager. But I don't know. Maybe that would draw more participation in the election. But.
It's possible, and actually you had that situation occur a few years ago in the town of Wayland. That is exactly what happened there. But the interesting thing is, the very next year the voters put it back.
Right.
Okay, so you know, you can make the argument either way. When I was on the board in 2006, we had a charter review. And it was the same exact thing. 4 of us wanted to make the change, and I was one of them. In fact, I even authored the language, okay? And I felt very strongly that it should be a 3/5 hire, 3/5 terminate, for no other reason than I just felt, you know, democratic rule.
Right.
And I never could conceive of a situation where we would ever be in a place where we could have a coup of sorts. And of course, this time, as you know, because you appeared before the committee, I had changed my mind. And I articulated that, and I said, why? And I said, because of what the town went through. I never, ever thought that that could ever happen. And that would just be a tragedy. Although, as I just said, I suppose the voters could put it back, you know, in the next election, but you don't know that that's going to happen. And you certainly don't want a good town manager thrown out for either no good reason or a made-up reason.
Right, a marginal reason or something.
But anyway, but I think that that all worked out, and of course, the selectmen at any time can bring forth a charter change. They don't have to wait for a charter.
We may actually be doing that.
Yep, you see, there you go, and it has been done in the recent past. So that's good.
I think we have a question about Board of Selectmen versus Select Board. The title.
I think you discussed that at your last meeting.
So I think we're going to we were told that had to be done in the charter.
Yes,
so
it does.
we'll bring that to the charter to make it.
That'll be a lot of wording changes, but that's okay.
It's a Word document. Replace.
You know, I'm trying to remember if we even.
I don't think that.
I don't think that even came up, which is shocking when you think about it in this time, especially given the fact that we had women on the Charter Review Committee. You
know, back to the reasoning behind that. You know, it's. I don't know if you're aware, but I've gotten involved because of being a selectman and I'm now a Minuteman for the Middlesex 6 Regiment of the Minutemen. And when Jim Curley came in front of us, I had made the comment, geez, I've always wanted to do that and grown up in Concord. And then he reached out to me.
That's all he needed to hear, right?
Yeah, he's like a dog on a bone when he hears
exactly.
that. But I've met a bunch of great guys through that because it's the whole Middlesex. So we have Dunstable and Pepperell and Carlisle, Westford, Chelmsford.
And you guys all get together?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought it was just within the town.
Yeah, no, when we appear in Westford, under the Westford banner, everybody thinks we're all from Westford. No, maybe 3 or 4 of the guys are actually from Westford. But anyway, so I met a gentleman who lives out in Drake, who moved from Chelmsford, and he said, you know, I can't stand the fact that Chelmsford has a representative town meeting. He says, Drake gets open town meeting, and I would much rather have a say in this. And so when you go back to that in the charter review, if you have someone who's sort of old school and wants a representative town meeting where everybody can voice an opinion, at least with having not open versus at least in a representative town meeting, if these questions on the charter go to them, maybe people would feel like, well, it's still up to the town's decision. But if you don't even give the option for it to go and you just let a committee make that decision, then
I don't like, and I was involved in a situation, and I won't get into what it was, but it was pretty controversial, where the selectmen short-stopped a vote going to town meeting, and I thought that was awful. I mean, and even though I agreed with the end result of the short stopping, I still thought it was bad, that the thing should have gone to the, I mean, the town meeting is the legislature, basically, for
Right.
the town, and why not let them weigh in, okay? And at the end of the day, it's got to go before the voters on a ballot anyway, all right? So
It was like a double backup.
exactly. So, I mean, I always thought that that was the right way to go. So I think your instincts are good on that. You did something recently at the town meeting, which is not commonly done. You recommended against a vote for the 2020 town budget. And I wonder if you could just elaborate on that a bit and explain why you took that position.
Sure. So I've been around for 2 years, and in the 2 years, I've, from Paul Cohen, heard we're short money. Whether it's due to a contract that we just settled, there's not enough money, or whether it's a school budget we're discussing, or whether it's our budget, when we get in the financials, and because we do get a nice report from Darlene,
Right.
the town accountant every quarter, and we discussed that, and it was probably in the fall. I don't remember if it was October, November, and Paul had said, "Listen, I've done a 3-year projection. According to my projections, in the next 3 years, we're going to be deeply in the red. We're going to have some problems, and there's going to have to be cuts, and it's probably going to be in services, and we're going to have to figure out where it's going to come from. It's going to be bad, especially if there's a recession." My background is economics and finance. My guess is, from what we see in the leading indicators and the current indicators that are running in the economy, the recession's probably not in the next year, but who knows, in the next 18 to 24 months.
It's inevitable.
Yeah. So if Paul's saying 3 years are going to be in the red, it's going to be worse if we're in a recession, we've got this budget problem. So in all honesty, when I stood up at town meeting and I asked Paul how many people have we hired in the last 3 town meetings, I was thinking the last 18 months. I'm not sure if he was thinking of it that way, or if he was thinking last 3 budget cycles. But I asked in the last 18 months how many have we hired. I thought the answer was going to be about 6 to 8 town and 4 or 5 school. I almost fell over when he said 24 school and 8 town. And I'm not sure, I probably should ask him to clarify, is that a net number, or is that a retiree replacement? Did people retire and we hired? Because I said, what's the net number in the last 3 town meetings? So I'm not sure. So I was really kind of surprised with that answer, and that even scared me more. Because if we're going to have a budget issue coming down the road, I would rather spend the money on things that we can cut easily than things that are harder to cut. And I think to hire somebody only to have to turn around 2 years and say, sorry, we can't pay for that position anymore, is playing with someone's livelihood and not fair.
And there's also an additional expense to the town when you consider unemployment.
OPEB and all that
compensation,
stuff.
Right.
Yeah, and unemployment and everything else. So I would have rather seen the money spent on an investment in the town, like the recycling buckets or the trash buckets that the trucks can pick up on their own, and because supposedly there's a savings there in workers' comp and injuries on the job with the trash companies. So something like that, where we put out the money to pay for the buckets for everybody in town, or do a cost share with them. Maybe another recycling day, which we've got a lot of complaints about. So just I wish, and part of it's my fault, because I probably should have attended more of the Finance Commission's last fall, Finance Committee meetings where they were talking about budgets.
Don't beat yourself up too badly. I think as a selectman, my observation is that you attend quite a few meetings, and even some that you're not a liaison to. And
Yeah, a lot of them not liaisons.
I've noticed that, and I think other people have noticed it too. So you're more than doing your job in that regard.
So I just wish, but I wish either that or just had been some part, and that's, again, another frustration, is just be clued in on sort of, I don't feel like it's a team approach, like, from Paul, hey, this is where we're going next year, this is my thoughts, this is how I want to do it. Instead, in February, we get the budget, and you hear the new positions laid out in there, and not even necessarily are they even laid out in there. If you watch the meeting where we were going through the town warrant articles for approval, and the budget was presented, the OSHA officer wasn't really brought up until I asked the question, is the OSHA officer in this budget? Yep, he's buried in whatever line. And
I think that was a surprise to many people.
Yeah, and so it's I just wish there was a collaboration of a team. Where are we going? Instead of a year by year, here's my budget, a 3 to 5 year, where are we going with this, and what's the goal? Is it to really do we need more heads, or do we want to grow services? And if not, then if we know there's a shortfall coming in 3 years, what can we do now to sort of hold that off? And I know it's a balancing act. You don't want to appear too rich for a town. You know, I was kind of surprised with the school fees getting cut. And I have, you know, it's not at the high school, but I was kind of surprised that the sport fees and the bus fees and all that were being cut down. You know, I'm talking to people in other towns, other selectmen in other towns saying they're increasing fees.
Nobody's doing that.
Yeah, so I kind of, to me, it was like, well, how can we afford that?
And I just hope they don't have to be reinstituted later if that's what they're going to do.
That's rough.
I remember when Governor Weld eliminated the cost of renewing your automobile registration.
Yeah.
And then 3 years later, they had to bring it back. And, you know, you say, well,
Why'd
okay,
you do that?
Why
Yeah.
did you do that? Okay. So,
Well, you know, along that line, though, like to me, and we do this in everyday my job, it's about stability. You know, and you want, people don't like big swings, in whether it's
Right.
big swings in their tax bill, big swings in expenses or fees. You know, you could say to someone, oh, you're going to get a 10% cut on this year, but we're going to go up 20% next year. That doesn't,
No.
people would rather a steady, you know, much smaller increase on a steady increasing, you know, something that's predictable versus, you know, big fluctuations.
I don't think the public sector does that very well. And like you, I have a private sector employment background in finance and administration. And I happen to think Paul Cohen is a very good town manager, and but I haven't always agreed with him on everything. And one of the things that I guess I have a major disagreement in, not with Paul specifically, but in general from a philosophical standpoint, is I am, I guess, a very tight-fisted Yankee. I'm very conservative money-wise, and I happen to think that the federal government, the state government, and the town government all spend too much money in just about every area. That's my personal philosophy. But having to work in the town, sit on the Board of Selectmen, I understand the reality, like you said, the mandates and so forth, and you don't have that much flexibility. But having that mindset and having to put my philosophical point of view aside and deal with the reality, whenever we do things, whenever we do incremental things, when it may not be absolutely necessary, it does bother me. And I guess that's where I may have a little bit of a disagreement sometimes with the town manager. Because as you know, in the private sector, if a person retires, what do we do in the private sector? We spend hours and days and weeks trying to figure out how we can get along without that position going forward. Because it's a bottom line thing, it's a P&L thing. They don't do that in the public sector. We got to fill a position. We got to fill a position. Or if we lose 15 jobs in 2003, which we did, you know, because of the 9(1) cuts that we got back then. Well, can we continue to manage that way? But what we've done as a town is we've hired back all of those positions and then some.
Right.
Okay? Not to saying that there isn't any justification for those positions. I understand the justification. I certainly understand the OSHA situation. But what I object to, I guess, is kind of the mindset of the public sector mentality. So when you did what you did at the town meeting, I wasn't quite sure what was going on at the time because, as you've just articulated, didn't have the background. But I thought, you know what, it's not a bad thing that we have a selectman that stands up and questions this process. So I felt actually pretty good about that when you did it. You know, even though we may have disagreed on, you know, what was being talked about, but I just, you know, I think it's not a bad thing. So
Yeah, well,
you know?
two more points to that is, you know, we keep getting unfunded mandates from the state, like the stormwater.
Yep.
So who knows what's coming next?
And look at the town of Drake. They're acting like they have the ability to walk away from that and not do it.
Right.
And that sends, I think the selectmen there are not acting responsibly because they're sending a bad message to the voters.
I think, if I'm just, you know, stand corrected, Drake, they voted not to add the cost to the bill. They said let the town find the funding.
Correct, but if you listen to their meetings, the discussion was, well, I mean, I understand they realize they can't walk away from it, but they were talking about it in political terms, like,
Right.
well, you know,
Yeah.
we can't spend the money, and well, you don't have a choice. The money has to come from someplace, and you know, unless you really want to drastically cut, you know, it's $1 million or $1.4 million, whatever it is, unless you want to take that amount of money out of your operating budget, which is where it's going to have to come from.
Right.
You know, this is a serious discussion. So,
And the other thing about the budget too is, you know, the part, and again, this is where it gets kind of funny, where people just don't understand the difference between municipal and then the way the structure of the government is set up. You know, and Paul said this in one of the meetings, it doesn't matter what we passed for a budget, he was still hiring an OSHA officer. He has that right. As the town manager.
He'll get it from some other place.
Right, he can cut
exactly.
the money. So you weren't really approving, we weren't really approving the OSHA position or, a town social work position.
The funding level is what you were.
That's it. So, it didn't really matter. Paul was going to hire those positions regardless. He would have had to cut that money from somewhere else. That's
Right.
probably a point it didn't make clear enough to everybody was, it's really about the number we're approving, not about the
Correct.
positions. And I, that was my only concern. I mean, to me, again, and this is probably why I think, I'm suited to be a selectman is, this sounds awful, but it doesn't, I don't care. And it's not that I don't care, it's, I know I can afford my taxes, it doesn't really bother me, but I do worry about the people who can't afford the taxes, and I worry about the rate of increase of our taxes. In the end, it went through, I tried, I did my best, and I really do think that we're just, those tax, I just am trying to figure out how to control down the increase of the tax bills.
And I think that's, even though the selectmen under our system are not directly responsible for formulating the budget, I still think that that's part of your responsibility. And I think as a group, you need to engage with the town manager to understand the priorities and have that discussion. And if you do that, you may find that you can exercise some influence.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we're writing a document for his review this year to sort of expand on what we did last year. So last year, I came forward with a new evaluation form for Paul.
Good.
With 5 different areas that we could evaluate him on that was more thorough and not a lot of gray areas where you could sort of interpret the way you want. And that, using a number scale and so forth, you can evaluate them. This year, the second part to that now is when we lay out the new goals, we're going to sort of use that SMART approach to building his goals, where we can actually, and I brought this to him and I said, this is what I want to do, and I want to take the goals that we laid out, but then I want to put, here's the goal, here are the objectives, and here's some of the key areas you have to hit to meet those objectives. And he bought into it. He said,
Oh, sure.
this makes sense to me. It's a lot more written out. It's easier to understand. It's there's accountability, and I'm happy Paul was 100% bought into it. The board, I've talked it over, with Virginia, because she sort of has that background, and I think in the meeting when we talked at the selectmen meeting about it, the rest of the board sort of bought into it and said, yeah, this is a good idea. So. I hope that we can get that finalized in the next 2 meetings and get that laid out for Paul.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and just looking at the board composition without casting any aspersions on anybody, and I know all the folks, and you and Virginia have the most experience, I think, in dealing with management issues and employee issues and so forth, just by virtue of your private sector experience, and the others not so much, I think. Not that they can't participate, of course they can, they're all intelligent folks, but I think it's good that you have taken that leadership position, and it's entirely appropriate for the chair.
What I find interesting is each member of that board actually fills an important piece of that decision-making process, because where Virginia has a lot of background in the management side, but also a lot of that HR sort of background. She's fantastic. Emily is really great on research, with her background in academia, and
Right.
She's just fantastic. You could give her a topic and she could come back in a couple of days with all kinds of data and backup. Pat's great on the details, whether it's proofing something or even just procedurally going to her and saying, well, how do we do this? She can explain it in incremental steps and in a very simple manner and understandable, so you know exactly what has to be done. And George is great with the public.
Oh yeah,
when,
definitely.
When you need to sort of gauge what's going on out there, George will tell you what the feedback is out there.
Exactly.
He's really wired into the town and the community, and it doesn't matter if it's North Chelmsford or South Chelmsford.
And that's the basis of a great team, and I think you've just summarized it. And under your leadership, in the next 9 months, I think you guys are going to get there, and we're going to see some very positive things from the board. Ken, thank you very much for being with us.